Hello, everyone, and welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on LIRmedia.tv, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And there's been a huge reaction to the first interview I did with Dr. John Cullinane, but I wouldn't expect anything less from the great Dr. Cullinane, who is, I suppose he's, at this stage now, he's the preeminent writer of history of Irish dance, and we're very privileged to have him on here with us on Lir Media TV. Today now, we're going to talk about John's book, Irish Dancing in London, and I suppose primarily about team dancing and Céilis and figures. So, hello, John. How are you? And thank you for getting some guests for me for my upcoming shows. You're wonderful.
My pleasure, Mary. My pleasure indeed. Indeed.
You might tell us about who they are.
Some of the people we have lined up for you would be Sue Tehran in South Africa. She is the person that I went out to first in 1999. I didn't know anything about her. We were just talking and I grabbed the bull by the horns off. I went out to Africa to start teaching Irish dancing in Africa. And Sue is now the first qualified S.D.C.R.G in all of Africa and doing tremendous work there. They have about, as a result of my visits from then, they have around 24 to 27 qualified S.C.D.R.Gs there now.
Isn't it amazing, John? Isn't it wonderful? Really, isn't it wonderful?
They had me out last October as their honoured guest at their South African Championships. So that's wonderful progress in that. And the other person that a very old friend of mine is,
Really?
She's Geraldine Ryan O'Shea. She is a teacher in Melbourne. In this year, September 17th, she celebrates her 90th birthday.
I'm really excited to interview her.
And she has been awarded the Australian Medal of Honour. Now, I have first visited Geraldine back in 1974. I went out to do workshops for her class. And they, by the way, Mary, that was like some of the very first workshops ever, kind of. Now we have workshops going on left, right, and centre.
Yeah.
In 1974, it was a journey to Australia. And
how long did it take you, John?
Well,
in those days, you'd nearly have to go by boat to England or to America.
No, I was flying, but the number of stops I had to come down about 6 times. You flew from here to Greece and from Greece to the Gulf, and you loaded every time. So it was a journey and a half. But when Geraldine traveled to Ireland in 1953, 52, and she'll be telling you about this, it took her 3 weeks to travel by ship. She was traveling as a young girl with her sister to find out what was happening in Ireland in Irish dancing and to update what she was doing in Australia. She was the
dedication.
She was the very first person outside of Ireland and England, and the very first North American or Australia or New Zealand to ever travel to Ireland and sit the S.D.C.R.G exam. So she will have some
stories. As indeed have you, John Cullinane. We have our own genius here of Irish dancing. John, tell us about your book, Irish Dancing in London, 1880 to 2014.
Well, I tell you, I brought that out to mark the fact that we were holding the World Championships in London in 2014. And very nicely, we had, during the World Championships, we had a reception at the embassy in London. And during that reception, our Irish ambassador, Dan Mulhall, he kindly launched the book, and and it coincided, as I say, with the World Championships in London, because a huge amount of our history originated in London. Attending, by the way, at the embassy was a friend of mine, Patrick O'Connell. It turns out his uncle was my teacher, Tommy Cullen, and his brother, Willie Cullen.
And small world, isn't it, John?
I met up with him at the embassy, and he brought me along medals that his uncles had won in Ireland and so on. And Patrick's father, Morris O'Connell, he was one of the very earliest teachers in London. You can never say the earliest or the first. I avoid those terms, but one of the earliest, before the commission reached out to London and before we had all the qualified TCRGs. So his father, I had a photograph there. I don't know if you might have it. We can send it on to you. A lovely photograph of the three men at a feis in Kilcorny. That was Patrick O'Connell's father, Morris, his uncle, Tommy Cullen, and his uncle, Willie Cullen, three adult men competing in the solo step dancing in London in Kilcorny in 1930. Now that's 90 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think it's not in your book.
No, it's not in my book. I sent it on to you, all right, but it's not in my book.
Yeah, it'll be.
Sorry, it is.
It is. It's right here.
Put your right hand up.
Yeah.
The three men. Yeah, the three men. They are wearing trousers, as was the norm at the time. Cork didn't accept the kilts for men until the 1930s, 40s.
Weren't they very advanced in their thinking?
Well, yes. Well, and by the way, Mary, just a little aside, one of the things I'm very proud of my accomplishments on the Irish Dancing Commission, in 1994, following a few years of pursuing it, the Commission accepted my recommendation that the kilts be optional and that no man dancer would be penalised for not wearing kilts.
That was a great rule, John. We were only talking about that the other day, and I was asking a few people what they thought of the kilts. Carol Scanlon, I think, was one. And we both thought that the kilts were very masculine. I mean, if you look at Danny Doherty's teams, they all wear the kilts and they look so, and for a while when you're looking up at the stage and you're watching it, you could almost think you were 12 or 13 again, back in the Arkla na Féile Hall, watching the adult teams or watching the Bridges of Ross being danced, and dances like that. You could really, it brings you back in time for a while, and it is very masculine, but it should be optional.
But yeah, because the effect of that rule came in 1994. It was further strengthened just by river dance and the advent of Flatley, and he made it macho and masculine to be Irish dancing in the trousers.
Yeah.
Because as a man, I can tell you, as a male dancer, young guy, the amount of razzing you got for wearing the kilts. And first of all, the kilts were never Irish. I will debate that some.
No, they were of Scottish, weren't they? Of Scottish origin.
The Gaelic League just took them on for a costume. And the other thing was they were never Irish, but the boys the amount of boys that were turned off of Irish dancing by having to wear the kilts was enormous. And so the minute that rule came in, within weeks, the boys were completely dancing in the trousers. That happened. There was a Leinster Championship on just shortly afterwards, and they were discussing it. They said, "Did you hear that was passed by the commission?" And the boys in the senior championship, some of the O'Sheas and the brothers and all that, and they said, "Yeah, but one goes out then wearing the kilts and the rest will be docked." So they decided if they all went out in the trousers, so they all danced in trousers that, and within weeks, whatever you and I or anyone else thinks about it, the important thing is that the male dancers dancing, Irish dancing today, opted for the trousers, and as I say, down with the kilts.
Metaphorically speaking.
Metaphorically speaking.
I see Inishalga in that team, and some of the dancers that are in that team would have been in my age group actually, in competition. When I was looking at it, it brought back so many memories, because that would have been probably my age group.
Yes, indeed. Inishalga were one of the great schools.
Yeah.
Matt, of course, was specialised really in the Céili dancing and figure dancing. And Matt and Mary teaching together as Inishalga won so many accolades. Really, they were a fantastic, fantastic class.
Yeah, because we used to dance. When I was with Nolan's, we did the Limerick Lace Workers, and we would have danced against Inishalga and that particular those particular teams, you know, that age group. And the same with
that is Matthew's team.
Matthews, sorry.
Matthew. Yeah. The one above at the top then is one of Ted Kavanagh's teams. There, yeah.
Yeah.
Ted was, up on your right hand corner.
Yeah, the one over here.
Yeah. No.
Here. I can't.
Yeah, you're right.
Pointing, because this is all. If I point left, it goes right.
you put your right hand up, and that is Ted Kavanagh.
Yeah. I was trying to get at that.
Now, in the figure dancing, they were superb, kind of, you know. Ted was a perfectionist in every way, and his teams were perfection. When they danced.
Joy to watch his teams. It really was. It was a joy to watch them. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So
there's some really old ones there now. There's some really old ones.
Yes, I'll tell you that was a team from Dundalk. I think it was a Céili team actually, but it was Tomás Farley. You will remember Tomás was a gentleman and a legend.
Oh.
And, sadly, he lived into his 100th year, but didn't reach his 100th birthday. But Tomás, he and the Dundalk dancers, they're in that for an All-Ireland Championship. He was big into the figure dancing as well, Tomás was. By the way, Tomás trained as a ballet dancer in his younger days.
Yeah.
Which was interesting.
You could see that he had a very beautiful stature. Everything was, but Maura Clerkin told me he did a lot of yoga.
Oh.
And that probably contributed to his longevity as well of age, because he was. But even when he examined me for my SCDRG, I was struck by the calmness of the man. He just exuded this sense of calm when you were around him. No matter how nervous you were, you got this feeling of calm when you were talking to him.
He was very well known for his yoga exercises, and even in the middle of an exam, and we'd have a little break or something, and Tomas would be doing his yoga exercises, standing on his head with his feet up in the air.
He was very progressive, really, wasn't he?
He was, yes. I always smile, and I joked with him about this, that he trained as a ballet dancer, but at the same time, the commission had very strong rules. When I was a younger teacher, we could not attend a modern dance. Technically, we would lose our TCRG.
Isn't that very much like the GAA years ago? Because my uncle played soccer for Ireland, but he played, and rugby for Ireland, but the CBS, the Christian Brothers, punished him, wouldn't let him play hurling because he had played the previous week soccer.
Yes, that was the ban. You just played Gaelic games and nothing else. And similar ban was in vogue in the Irish Dancing Commission. Now, it was very rare that it was implemented, but technically we were not supposed to attend any modern dancing. You see, the Gaelic League, when it was set up, was promoting Céili and figure dancing, and they were absolutely scared of their life of foreign dancing, all these jazz jives. And you must remember, even
they turn your head.
When we went to a Céili, you wouldn't be allowed to dance an old time waltz or anything like that, and they had the term fear Céili, which means it was a fear Céili. You didn't do military two-step, you didn't do a waltz, you didn't do a shoe the donkey. It was strictly strict. They were really scared, as I say, of this term, obsession with foreign dancing.
And by foreign, they meant British.
Well, yes.
For the most part.
Or anything jiving or jitterbugging or waltzing and so on and so forth. And then they were obsessed by and confused as well by the whole history of what we now call Céili dancing. And they introduced this thing that if you did a set dancing, the quadrilles, the lancers, or any of those, that was out. They said that the quadrilles, the sets, were introduced by the British, and we weren't allowed to do them. Now, they never questioned anything, and they couldn't support any argument. They didn't tolerate any argument. And one of those that was absolutely against the sets was Matt Milady. With this saying that they were introduced by the British. Well, when the first Céili was held in London, it was all set dances and old time waltzes that they did, because the Céili dances were at that time unheard of. They hadn't been collected. My mother and father, who were out and out Irish nationalists, they performed sets in when they went dancing, and my father was a caller of the set dances, and he was old IRA. My mother was coming them on, and so on. And I hasten to add, in Cork, we hadn't a tradition of the Céili dances. We had a tradition of the set dances. And so without bothering to research where did the quadrilles and the sets come from, they just said, no, you can't do these. By the way, they said you can't do those, you must do the proper, what we now call Céili dances. But going back in history, at the first Céili, it was all sets that were performed, sets and old-time waltzes. And then after the first Céili, because the ones that we now refer to as Céili dancing, they weren't known. Then they noticed that the Scottish had 8-hand reels and 4-hand reels. And then there was a person in London called Professor Patrick Reedy. He came from Kerry, and he was teaching 8 hands and 4 hands that were almost identical, the movements with the Scottish 8 hands.
Okay.
They then went to him and they got him to start teaching the Gaelic League classes, the adult Gaelic League classes, and then they've gradually converted people over from, you're not to do the sets. Do you remember the ones that you performed at the first Céili, and we were all up and Cormac McGinley and the whole lot of it, and well, now they're British, you know, totally substantiated, and now we're going to teach you to do the proper 8-hand reels and 4-hand reels. And there was even a funnier one then, with a little connection with your part of the country. In the 1900s then, Reedy started teaching the figure dances that he knew from Kerry.
Okay.
Because all of those 8 hands and 4 hands that have a similar structure, a lead, a body, a figure, a body, a figure, a body, a figure, they all were taken down in Kerry, and he taught them in London. And then the London Gaelic League, their teams came to the Oireachtas in 1900 or 1902, around that, and they performed 4-hand reels and 8-hand reels. And guess what? The Oireachtas said, oh, they got an outstanding applause for this. But the Oireachtas said, the Gaelic League, that they didn't know where they came from. And so they had to ban them for a few years. They banned what we now promote as our Céili, or 4 hands, 8 hands, and so on.
As a matter of interest, John, when did the Céili book, if you like, come into existence?
Well, I'll just finish the last bit and I'll come back to your question then. So at the Oireachtas, one team from Limerick, O'Neill's 8-hand reel, that's about 1902-04 now, they performed the 8-hand reel, and it was so unknown and everything that they got a standing ovation at the prize for this concert. I think that, yeah, and they were referred to as, from then on, as O'Neill's famous 8-hand reel. After that, they told him, you're not to do those again, they're barred. So coming back to your question then, the commission was set up around, say, 1930. It's quickly established as one of its mandates to collect Irish figure dances, because we didn't call them Céili dances until much later. So they sent out a circular to all parts of the country looking for figure dances. And they produced the Céili books, as we know, the Rinky Forna, were produced in 3 different parts. So the first part was produced 10 figure dances known as Rinky Forna in 1939. Now, they were largely based on the works of the London Gaelic League, who had published 2 books. They came over to the south coast of Ireland. They landed at Wexford and travelled along to the Macroom Feis, which was the oldest feis in the world. And then they went on down to Kerry, and they were collecting any of these figure dances that we now call Céilis. And they didn't have too much success until they landed in Kerry. And lo and behold, then they found like things like the high call cap, the 8-hand reel, the 8-hand reel, the 4-hand reel, humus abandon, high call cap, all of those. Gosh, I'm getting tongue-tied. All those 8-hands and 4-hands, they collected those in Kerry, and they published them in 2 booklets. They did that, the London Gaelic League, in 1902. They published 2 books. So when the commission then set up in 1939, it had the groundwork. Its first book was almost completely based on the London books of O'Keefe and O'Brien and J.J. Sheehan. All of those were members of the Gaelic League, officers of the Gaelic League in London. So the first part was 1939. Then they quickly produced a part 2 in 1943. So it brought it up to 20 dances. And they then, of course, made those a compulsory part of the SCDRG exam.
Yeah.
Then the 3rd book of dances wasn't produced until 1969. The delay was, believe it or not, over 1 dance. The dances kind of were ready to publish them, but they couldn't agree over the fairy reel. Because the fairy reel was a kind of a generic dance. Every area had a fairy reel.
Cornish yoga.
Donegal and so on and so forth. And in Cork, we had our own fairy reel. And I was at conventions. I refer to the dance teachers conventions when that was discussed. And they were demonstrating fairy reel. Now, we never had the square and diamond in our fairy reel. There were other differences. Ours was in and out and in and out, a big ring and then 2 small rings, etc. And we never had the square and diamond.
I like the square and diamond.
And yes, but it isn't easy to do it. Like
it's not, but I like it. I like the square and diamond. I think.
Yeah, and even the square and diamond, different areas had different ways of performing it. Yeah. So eventually they had to compromise, something had to give, and they put 1 version into the book in 1969, combined the 3 lots of dances into 1 book. And if you were in the unfortunate position to do your exam after that, you had to be examined on 30 figure dances.
It's very unlike the Gaelic League to compromise, isn't it?
Yes.
To find a compromise position on anything.
Now, there's 2 interesting points that arise out of that. First of all, our Cork fairy reel, I'm only just giving an example. As a result of putting 1 fairy reel in a book, we were then in competition. We were not allowed to do the commission, our own fairy reel. So that was lost. And that is
madness. It's just insanity. It's just biting off noses to spite faces.
That is contrary to the mandate of the Dancing Commission. So to counteract that, an aspect that I'll come on to later on, I am very much into promoting Céili figure dances that are not danced at all, and produced another book with a lad in America. We can come back to him later.
Yeah.
And I have taught our Cork fairy reel at workshops in Prague and Czechoslovakia, Prague and Czech Republic, and I teach other figure dances that are being lost.
I think the Duke reel is one dance that you don't see ever performed. Yeah. I've never seen it performed in front of me anyway, at the Duke reel, and I think it's a lovely, lovely little dance.
Yes, uh, one of the first times I ever saw it performed in a competition, funnily enough, was in South Africa.
Really?
And Brenda was judging it, and she wasn't that familiar with it because it had only just been in the books and we never saw it. But the teachers there were preparing for their exam, and so they had competitions for every dance in the book.
Oh, well, fair play to them. Fair play to them.
Now, coming back then, I was very hung up about this idea that if you put one version into a book, that is very good, because I can go to Australia, New Zealand, to Alaska, to South Africa and everything, and they will all know the forehand reel.
Yeah.
That is good. I could stand into a forehand reel with 3 Australians tomorrow morning and so on. And so could you. But the downside of it is, what happened to all the other forehand reels? And I have in my book on the history of Céili dancing,
I have that book.
I have compiled a table, and in that table I have listed over 100 Céili dances. And on the forehand reels alone, to illustrate the point, I have included references to over 20 different forehand reels. And now our teachers, we are spreading, in the American phrase of Mr. Trump, we are spreading false information, false documents by leading our teachers
fake news,
that there's only one forehand reel. I have collected about 20 forehand reels. One of those
maybe you should do a book, John. Sorry for interrupting you, but maybe you should do a book on all the forehand reels, just solely on the 20 forehand reels, and give people all the versions.
Well, yeah, we are.
So they can choose which version they want to do, and maybe the commission should introduce an optional forehand reel competition that they can choose which version of the forehand reel they wish to do. Wouldn't that be interesting, instead of looking, say, at 20 forehand reels coming out that are all the same? You'd have variations.
Absolutely. And it would be fulfilling the mandate of the commission, that is to promote Irish dancing, all its aspects.
Absolutely. We're on the same wavelength, John. I'm starting to rise, I suppose.
Now, I'll tell you, just one forehand reel is very interesting. It is called the Castlebridge forehand reel. Castlebridge, from down by Enniscorthy in Wexford. When O'Keefe and O'Brien from London, when they came, they collected that forehand reel. They saw them dancing it at the Enniscorthy Feis in 1902. They described it and put it into their booklet. And that was the forehand reel that was danced by all dancers in Australia before the commission introduced its exams. Geraldine, if you're talking to her later on, you can ask her this. The Castlebridge forehand reel, very common. They didn't know that the forehand reel that we do is actually the Kerry forehand reel, the Kerry version. And that, but they didn't know that when the first exams were held in Australia, they had to learn their books, and they had to learn their forehand reel from the book. And Tomás O'Farrelly then told them, like in future in their competitions, they must dance the dances from the book and no other versions. So the Castlebridge forehand reel, which Well, I never heard of it in Ireland, really. It wasn't popular in Ireland, but
It reminds me, John, of the song "Flowers are red, young men, and green leaves are green. There's no flowers any other way than the way they've always have been seen." You know, I mean, the richness of dance should be preserved, and the choice and the variety, if you like. And it would be lovely as an adjudicator to be able to sit down and look at 24 and reels coming out, all different versions.
Yes, yes, indeed. And so I have gone to workshops in Prague, run by a Czech person there, Václav Bernard. He runs his workshop, a magnificent workshop, taking in flutes and violins, harps,
wonderful.
singing, lilting.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Everything, the whole gambit of Irishness. And I'm very honored there because of I taking my group to Czechoslovakia. You have a photograph of them up there.
I have. I actually, as if I actually preempted what you were going to say, I actually did it all on its own, John.
Yes.
Look at that.
That was my group. I had an invitation in 1967.
And Brenda's there on the left.
Yes.
And you're on the right with your sister Cis.
Yeah, and
Billy Barry is in the middle there.
Billy Barry's there. Now, the background to that is I got an invitation to Czechoslovakia in 1967. It was behind the Iron Curtain. That was, people disappeared. People disappeared behind the Iron Curtain. And I was the only one to take up the invitation. That year, Brenda, I think she had, Sharon was her baby and so on. So we combined to go, our teams to go to Czechoslovakia. And so you have Brenda there, Geraldine there.
Brenda and her sister, and you and your sister Cis on the other side. And I say Billy Barry because Billy is from Mallow, and Billy would be my producer's brother, Billy Barry, but he's a very close friend of Brenda's family, and he helped her organize the Mallow Festival years later, so folk festival. So he was a pupil of hers for many, many years. But that was a combined group of Cullinane and Springer.
Yeah, well, it just went as the Cullinane because I was the one who accepted the invitation. But the dances came from my own school and the musicians, John Ambrose, the pipers, and so on and so forth. And I'll come back to. I have gone to Prague for 3 years, 3 or 4 years now, to workshops there, and they have a great appetite there. They come from all countries, about 12 or 14 different countries to that workshop, and they have a great appetite for dances that are not in the Céili dance book, other dances, and that suits me. So I have taught other Céili dances other than those in the Rinky Forna books. One of the dances that I taught was this dance, the Castle Bridge forehand reel.
Excellent.
And I jokingly said to them, this is a very Czechoslovakian forehand reel because it commemorates the castle in Prague and the Charles V famous bridge. So your bridge and your castle are commemorated in this forehand reel. Totally untrue. But I said to them, this dance hasn't been seen since 1969, and I don't think it was seen in Ireland since 1900. So they learned it, they choreographed it, and put it into a setting at a concert in which they had a little kitchen in Wexford and a weaver and a fiddler and everything. And then they gradually started teaching the other ones, and then they all got up and they danced this castle bridge. And I was asked then to give the background to it, that this dance had never been seen in Ireland since 1902, like 100 years ago. There was even a better follow-up to it. Some of those dancers were in Belfast in the north later on. This was only about 2 years ago now. And they, to my absolute joy, they sent me a flyer about a Céili concert that they were having in Belfast. And they were going to teach the Castlebridge forehand reel. So a group from Czech Republic were reintroducing the Castlebridge forehand reel back into Ireland after 100 years. So that's a nice one.
Isn't that fabulous?
Yeah, I tend to say Czechoslovakia because when I got there in 1967, it was combined, of course, and separated.
Well, I remember when, when we were in Germany dancing and with Bonratti, and we were going to Vienna. So we had to go through Czechoslovakia. It was still Czechoslovakia at the time. And I was the only dancer there, and there was singers and musicians. And I had a photograph, a passport I got, and you had to be really serious in the photograph. And I can remember the fear when the customs guy came on the coach to look at the passport, and he looked at it and looked at me and looked at it and looked at me and started laughing. And it broke the ice because I looked like one of the Bader Meinhof gang. In the passport, how I got through Czechoslovakia, but they checked you on your way through from Germany to Austria, and the food was everything was so cheap in Czechoslovakia, so inexpensive. And then when we went to Vienna, everything was so expensive.
Yeah, well, when we went there, like in 1967, it was the bureaucracy was just outrageous. I, as the director of the group, had to sign forms every night for where each one of us were staying that night. I couldn't just say the group of 30 of us were staying in such a place. I had to sign a form from Mary Honan, such a thing, Maureen O'Rourke, such a thing, Geraldine, such a thing. I had to sign that, and I had to go to the police station every night. And that was even frightening. I was being taken on my own and back. And when we went to a bank, the same thing. I said, in the name of God, please don't be changing any more money, because I have to sign my name something like 3 times on 3 forms. For the whole bureaucracy was outrageous. But following that, just say, we danced in Wenceslas Square when we arrived there, and a very informal, impromptu concert of music and so on. The next year, the Russians again invaded it. So it was a historic time when we were there. We were supposed to go into Poland originally, but we couldn't, because the Warsaw troops were massing on the border, ready to invade Czechoslovakia. And they knew this. And that was the year that we were there. They knew they were going to be invaded. We only found out when we got there.
They realized they were already invaded by the Irish.
Yeah. So it was very historical times. Within 12 months or so, the Russians invaded it. And when I was out at the concert in Prague, being honored for the 50th year, they showed over my head, they showed views of the Russian tanks going down Wenceslas Square. And the first thing is that they did was the platform outside the top of the museum at the top of Wenceslas Square, they bombed that with their big tanks. And that was the actual platform that we had danced on. And I remember, to everyone's amusement, I said, "Oh my God, the Russians didn't like our dancing." And then they were occupied by,
Just jealous of you.
Russia
Just
again.
jealous of you.
Yeah, so it was very historic. And by the way, we went and visited a folk dance group there in Ostrava. That is in Slovakia now. And I went back, I've been back there revisiting them. But there was a young folk dance group there. They had been in Dublin 2 years ago before that, but they were involved in the resistance to the Russian occupation. And sadly, very little of them survived.
Yeah.
And I had to give instructions to my team. Nobody was to write a letter when we came home, a letter, a card, or anything would endanger their lives. So it was very historical.
But you know, I'm thinking there, as you were talking as well earlier, London had such a huge impact when you think about it on the progression of Irish dancing.
Yes, I'll come back to London for you. The Gaelic League was founded in Dublin in 1893.
Yeah.
The Gaelic League was founded in London in 1894, about a year later.
Yeah.
It became outrageously popular. We have no idea the popularity of the Gaelic League. And everything that you inherited later on, the dancing classes and all that, that all came from the Gaelic League.
Yeah.
So some of the things that we must attribute to the Gaelic League was they were established in 1894. They held annual concerts, Irish concerts on St. Patrick's Night. And they eventually became so popular in the early 1900s that they couldn't find a hall large enough to facilitate them. So they had matinees and night shows. And at those, all the dancing was promoted and the solo dance. And they even brought solo dancers over from Ireland to perform at their concerts, including the Halpins and including a lot of dancers from Cork, because they were able to get the boat over from Cork to London. They then, in 1897, they set up the first Céili. They went to the Scottish evenings and found out that the Scottish people were having social evenings there, which they call Céilis. And they decided that this is what they wanted. And they set up the Céili, unknown. The first Céili in the world was held in London. Now, when I published that first, some of the teachers on the commission came to me. They did not like it. And they said, no, the first Céili was held in Dublin. And I said, where's the proof? I was judging the London Feis in the 1970s, and I actually went in because...
As a London-born woman, I'm very happy to hear all of this, John.
Yeah, well, the London Feis was run by the Gaelic League, and the Great Britain was set up by the Gaelic League and all of that. But I was judging, and during the daytime then, you were free because the competitions didn't start till 4 o'clock when they were all out of school. And that London Feis ran for about 8 days. I was at a loose end, and what did I do? I went into the Gaelic League premises in, Belgrave Square, I think. Because it was the Gaelic League were running the London Feis. Yeah. And they said to me, Anya Nachtons, you should come in and look at our minutes. And I went through the minutes of the Gaelic League and their papers because they were winding down in 1970. Sadly, this organisation that filled the Albert Hall and every hall in London with concerts and everything were now winding down.
Very sad. It really is sad.
And she presented me with this document. It was the report by Fionn McCullum. where he attended the first Scottish evening and where he set up the first Céili. And it was an account of the first Céili held in the Bloomsbury Hall just near the British Museum in 1897. And it was held on the 1st of November because it was a Féile Samhain, celebrating the November feast day. That was a big thing in the Irish calendar, Féile Samhain. And so they established all of that.
Yes.
I already mentioned that just following that then, they had the initiative when they found out that Patrick Reedy had 4 hands and 8 hands from back in Kerry. They said, like to themselves, is there a number of those dances? And they thought to themselves, these are ancient Irish dance forms that we must get. And so 2 lots of them came along the south coast of Ireland to Kerry, and they collected our dances that became the basis for our Rinky Fornas. And not only that, but they invented the terminology to describe a dance. You know, opposite man proceeds anti-clockwise and all of that.
Oh, I have to say, John, the terminology behind in the figure dance book is a nightmare for anyone trying to learn it off, or to do the TC or the ADCRG. And I personally think if you've actually passed your TCRG, you shouldn't have to do the books again, and you shouldn't have to do the dancing. You should only have to do the judging if you're doing the ADCRG. It's just brain deadening having to go through. Yeah. If you were never somebody who did a whole lot of teams, I was mostly a solo dancer. The terminology is what actually gets to you right hand to opposite gent and advance and retire and
can I say to you that
terminology.
They have done a wonderful job recently in standardizing that, because you see the problems arose way back long. I mentioned to you that it was compiled in 3 different sections. So nobody edited the different sections to standardize the terminology. So if you looked at it, you found that book 2 is using a term leading man, and book 1 could use that opposite or country couples and all that. So the terminology was never standardized.
I remember when we were doing the TCRG, and I did it with Maya Walsh that year. I can remember Maya was on the panel, and I think Michael Dillon said he did it that year as well. So we did it, and I can remember we were inside in a room, and it was all glass, about a big glass window in front, so you could see the people behind. And you could see everybody was there giving right hand and left hand, and there were anyone outside of Irish dancing was looking in. They think we were insane, because you were there trying right hand to opposite gent, left hand, and you're trying to write it all down, and you're trying to get so much language into such little time.
Yeah.
And and there has to be. And there has to be an easier way of putting it, you know.
Mary, I sat at
so much your brain can take.
The time when it was an oral exam before the written. In fact, Tony Nolan was, I think, one of the first to sit the written paper, his time of his exam. But the oral exam, you went before 3 examiners, and you had 3 of them firing questions at you from all angles, from any dance in the books, and that as an oral thing was 100% more scary, because your mind had to switch from this dance to this dance.
But in a sense, when you're doing it for the TC, and you have 8 children in front of you, and you're asked to teach the first figure of Trip to the Cottage, it's almost easier because you have the 8 children. You can say, you do this, 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 and this, and you do it in your own language. But when you're trying to do it for the written part of the paper, you're trying to remember it. So the easiest for me was to learn the book off word for word. So I knew the book off like poems, a series of, because my research, my studies were all in English literature. I learned, that's the way I was. I learned everything off like a poem.
Mary,
it was the only way I could get through it.
I think, was it Thomas Farley? Yeah.
He was great.
Came out, or Sean O'Donnell. He analysed the result of the first exam, SCDRG exam, held in South Africa, and he looked at the results in the Céili dance books, the written paper, and so many of them were up 97, 98, and 99, and the marks were so high that he said, never again let anybody tell me that they can't learn the Céili.
I'm proud to say I got 100% each time I did the books.
Well, so
because I learned it off word for word. I had no choice.
You come back to an important fact then, which is true, that we as a body are failing because most of the teachers admit to you, they just learn those, they go in, as soon as they pass their exam, they just have a burning of the books and forget it.
No, I kept my book. As I'm a hoarder. I kept my book as a souvenir.
Somehow we are failing because the lack of interest, we're not generating interest in the Céili dancing at all.
But Kathleen McLaughlin and James were talking to me the other day, and they were talking about lamenting actually the decline of figure dancing and Céilis, and I was wondering, what do you think is contributing to that, John?
I don't know. I'll try and answer it. The figure dance competition and McLaughlin's were one a class that really specialised in figure dancing and had some beautiful figure dancing. And O'Rourke's, as you know, they won the figure dancing at the world the first year or something. And I was runner-up and I won it the second year, such a thing. But that figure dance competition, I'll just give you a historical account of that. That was introduced by the Gaelic League at Feshes way back in the 1940s or so as a dance suitable for a Céili, a new dance suitable for a Céili. Now, that idea wore very thin very easily because as people put up their teams, they were perfection and they were so dances perfected and so on. And the dances were actually fantastically entertaining, but I would dread to think of trying to teach them at a Céili. Now, just over your head, if you put up your left hand up high, over your head, exactly, yeah. There is a photograph of a team, and I am the little boy just to the right of the cup.
Wow.
I have no medals on me because I think I had 2 medals. Now that was a cup at Feshmachu, Corndalgan, and it was for a new invention dance, newly invented.
Yeah.
See, the terminology changes.
That's right, they were always called new inventions.
Yeah, we were new inventions and so on. And then it overlapped then a bit at times with drama. I remember Céili Penny having a team milking a bull on the stage, kind of, sorry.
Always had that team. She had that team forever. Every team was ever taught that. I helped Celine out with her classes when I was doing my TCRG, and I think even then she had the cow or the bull being milked. Does a bull be milked, or is it a cow?
Yeah, sorry, a cow being milked. as biologists, we're doing very bad.
You're a biologist. Are you a biologist or a botanist?
Well, botany is one of the sections of biology, so I'm a biologist.
Biology. I loved biology.
Sure.
I really liked biology.
Lectured for 40 odd years in biology, and I do everything by 40 years. I was over 40 years an examiner, the whole lot. But coming back to this dance then, it was a newly composed dance suitable for a Céili. Then we forgot about suitable for a Céili, and we said newly composed, newly invented dance. And then it's gradually became known as a figure dance. Now, in my time, and you will remember it, the highlight of the Worlds and the All-Irelands was the figure dance. The fantastic teams that in earlier years did Lynn and the McCoys produced from the north. And down there you have on the corner is one of Lillian's teams. Lillian O'Moore, yeah.
I saw, gosh, she was such an attractive looking woman. Such as, you can still see that in Lillian today. This almost the same ilk, I think, as Mrs. Mulcahy. That straight, pencil straight carriage. And I've seen some young photographs of Lillian, and she was a striking looking woman.
She was, and a brilliant teacher over a tremendous span of time. So then you had the McCoys, you had such a thing. I remember one year putting in a team, and I tied with Anna McCoy, and I nearly dropped in the Mansion House, and she came up to me to compliment me. And she was the nicest person. She was gracious in success and in defeat, but she very seldom suffered defeat. She was so perfection. So those were the highlights. And now that competition, sometimes at some of the Worlds, there is no team entered for, or else there is worse than that. There's one team who go up and perform and are called world champions, which dishonors all the teams down through history. Now, I have talked to James McLaughlin about this and tried to say, is there anything we can do to revert that? And how did it come in and so on? And the only answer I can give you is this. We are a victim of our own success in the solo dance. And river dance and all of those, they have reinstated kind of the importance of solo dancing.
Would there be a space, John, for a separate championships for teams only?
Yeah.
Because I think people are drawn towards competition, number one, and they're drawn towards titles in many respects and towards championships. And if there was a special championship solely for teams.
But Mary, when you have the World and you have the All-Irelands championships and there's no entry in the figure dance, what can you do?
But you see, it's combined and I think people who maybe are focused primarily on solo, they can't give the same amount of attention to the teams and to their solos. So if you had at a later date in the year some type of championship specifically for teams only, then it would give teachers the opportunity to focus on their teams on that championship only. It's just a thought.
I have another theory about that, and it is this. If you look at somewhat 1 or 2 decades ago there, the figure dance competition reached the zenith of perfection. I mean this now, not to hurt anybody, to prohibit. It was so perfect.
Yeah.
But two teams in particular, Danny Doherty's and Shannon McMahon.
Oh God,
those two schools from the Midlands, they produced teams that were utter perfection.
They were. It was hard. You know, it was hard it would be hard to be unbiased or to be biased in a situation like that, because they were exceptional.
And they brought it to the zenith of new movements and this snappy, crisp, such a thing. Where
think of the snappy crisp over the flowing.
Yeah. See, and when I was teaching my figure dancing, you got a lovely movement and you held it for 2 bars or even 4 bars, and you left everybody say, oh, that's the star, oh, the girls. Nowadays, you know, and few, if any, teachers were willing to try and compete with that, because the amount of time it was a new kind of dance genre in a way that was evolving, and the other teachers weren't prepared to put the time in to a team, and knowing before they went up at all that who did you get first? Was it Danny Doherty?
There were still some amazing amazing teams. The year I mean, it's not so long ago, I suppose, that I did judged for 4 days at the Worlds, and I judged some of the teams, and I think there was about 30 teams, if not more, in one of the competitions that I judged, and they were all exceptional. And you were thinking, you know, God, some of these are not going to actually recall because of the amount that was in it. And since then, there just doesn't seem to be the same amount.
That was the Céili competition, not the figure.
The Céilis.
The figure has crashed for a number of years.
Yeah.
I've taught with James McLaughlin. I have the greatest respect for him and regard. And
but you had John Carey did figures, and Edward and Byron, they did figures, and there were loads of figures in it that year, and you know, and you just wonder, where are all the figures gone to now?
Well, as I say,
of course,
the teachers nowadays, and it's partly as a result of the success of the shows and the exposure to the show dancing around the world. They all want the intricacies of the footwork, the percussive hornpipes, etc., etc. And the other thing is, you don't have the same concentration of dancers in an area. Like in Birmingham, when I went there first, you could have 128 hand reels. The concentration, the Irish commitment, the Irish community commitment, the number of dancers who would go along to be on a team, and the same in London. But now schools are recruiting more solo dancers, and the schools don't have the numbers to do figure dancing, or the time, or even the ability to compete with this zippy-zappy figure dance style.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that, you know, if I personally think it's if teachers are concentrating, you know, they have to focus on one thing, and if they're focusing on their solos for the World Championships, for instance, they can't also focus on teams. Whereas if you had 2 separate competitions, and you had one particular championship that was specifically for figure dancing, possibly teachers would be able to separate out their time and focus their solos on this championship and their figures on this championship at a different stage in the year.
Yeah.
And maybe they would be able to give give the time and divide their time, because they're able to, it's not all for one championship, because you can't do everything as human beings.
Mary, the other side of that coin then is the dancers are now for the World Championship. In some ways, it was the worst thing we ever introduced, and I can say that I was a founding member of it. The downside of it is it has put so much concentration on solo dancing, and
that's what I'm saying, John.
Dancers will go to every length and 10 lessons a week if they're to try and get to the World Championships, to be a qualifier to get to the World Championships. And that has become the be-all and end-all of Irish dancing. And they haven't the time or the inclination.
And as well as that, there's only so many children within anyone's class that's going to be good enough to go to a World Championship. And the decline in numbers within classes is going to increase, because you haven't the children who may not be able to get to a solo championship at a world, but might be able to do a world figure dancing championships.
Yeah.
If there was a world figure dancing championships introduced or something like that at a completely different time of the year, that people, it's just, I'm probably off the wall with that idea, but I'm sure maybe not. Maybe there is room to have a major championships for figure dance only, which would increase the numbers within classes, and children wouldn't be feeling, well, I'm not good enough to go to a world. But you might be good enough to be part of a team that goes to a world figure dancing championship.
Yeah. Yes. But I think one other thing, I did go to COGAL events, such a thing, and that posed a question for me, because their figure dance competition is healthy enough.
Yeah.
I looked at their figure dancing and I discussed it with a teacher of theirs and enjoyed the discussion very much. I was saying to him that our figure dancing has collapsed in the commission, and they were still recruiting teams. And we looked at it, but the content of their dances, they were still, it was as though I was looking at a commission competition 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
We didn't go in for all this shh, 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 shh.
It was more natural.
I am convinced that this snappy, jazzy genre of figure dancing has contributed to the downfall of the figure dance. If you went to the COGAL figure dance now, you could look at it and sort of say, oh yeah, I could possibly train a team for this competition. If you went to the Worlds and you were looking at Sian-Éireann McMahon and Danny Doherty and John Carey's and all those, be honest, like your first reaction is, I wouldn't know where to start to train a team like that. So it has now
evolved. It's evolved.
Yeah. By the way, going back in the history of the World Championships, when we had the World Championships first, we had figure dance, new composed dance, and what happened there was within 2 or 3 years, the Americans were bringing over teams for this figure dance competition. And they had a different kind of concept of what was meant by this new figure dance competition. We had in our minds the standard kind of
circles and squares,
figure dance and formation and so on, but no props and no this and no that. The Americans had a version in which they used props and they changed music and so on. And so for a few years, they were dispirited by their teams not being looked at in this competition. And so we had to sit down at commission level and say, well, what can we do to promote this? And we recognized that there was 2 different categories in that competition. And the answer, of course, then was to separate them. And so at the World and so on and so forth, you have that figure dance competition was divided into dance drama and figure dance.
Yeah.
And so we have the separate dance drama, which is another thing. Like,
yeah, Kathleen McLaughlin sent me her dance drama to put to the start of their show. I said to her, if you can find it for me, send me the dance drama and it was so funny, where she had Danny Doherty coming out with all the medals on him. Do you remember the year that the Hills of Donegal?
Yes, yeah.
It was so good. And then another year she had Gavin Doherty coming out, putting on a costume on a child. They're lovely, all those dance dramas, you know.
And see, that is a question as well, that the dance drama is popular enough, the figure dance has declined, you know.
Commission is going to have to put its head together to try and think of left of center ideas to try and revive the dance the figures.
Well, yes, and I don't wish to be too critical of the Commission, because I'm wholeheartedly loyal to
we all are.
And especially the success of the World Championships, what we set up 50 years ago. But what I was going to say, at a Commission meeting, again, the whole meeting is taken up by association rules. Who can judge who and so on. And variations on that. And then it's 3 months since we discussed it, so we can discuss it again and add on. And the Commission, I asked, many years ago now, could we have a day?
One day, just,
and title it, Is There Life for CLRG with Outside of Competition? If you stopped competition in the morning, what would we have to discuss? Because
it's appropriate now, John, to talk about that, to have a Commission meeting, maybe on Zoom, to talk about, particularly now that we see what life is like for Irish dancing outside of competition.
Yeah.
We're forced into it almost to see that there is a life beyond competition.
By the way, we were talking about Céili dancing earlier on, and just an aspect of Céili dancing. I stress that a number of the Céili dances were collected in Kerry, and they were of the same structure as the quadrilles.
Yeah.
Kerry Céili dance structure. A lead around a body, a figure, etc. Eight, the forehands. And all of those, I can tell you where nearly every one of those, the cross reel, for example, is called after Crosstown. If you're driving into Killarney, where the railway, the road goes over the railway, look right there and you'll see Gort na Cross in Irish, the crossroads. And then the 8 and jig. The 8 and jig that we do in the books is properly known as the Glenbeigh 8 and jig. It was taken down in Glenbeigh as distinct from all the other 8 and jigs. But our teacher.
And how do you have so much space in? I mean, how could any human being have so much space within one brain for as much information as you have? Isn't the brain an amazing muscle, if you like?
Yes, but Mary, kind of the answer to that.
Well,
I developed this fantastic in the history of Irish dancing. And the other thing is, you touched on it way back at the start. I have been doing Irish dancing research since the 1960s, and I published my first work in 1982, and I ran workshops in Killarney and in Mallow in those years. So I was publishing and researching it when I would say nobody else was.
When
Or,
God was a child, as they used to say.
yeah. And when I produced my first books, people didn't buy it. I had it up at the World Championships and they were saying to me, what is that? The history of Irish dancing. What's it about? Is it an event? Who's judging it? You know, what competition, such a thing? There was no concept of interest in history. So that was in the 1980s. So 30, 40 years later, I'm still studying and writing books and collecting material because I was.
Thank God for that, John. And I hope that I hope that these shows help in some way to give a different dimension to your books, because some people might be good readers, might be avid readers, might be interested in reading, but other people, I know a few people have said to me that they love to actually sit down and just watch and listen to John Cullinane from his own lips saying what's in his books.
And can I say, Mary, I totally agree with you. The era when people read, I have about 1,500 pages printed now. People are not so inclined to sit down and read them. With that in mind, that was why I produced a DVD, 2 hour long, talking about the history and all the set dances. And your approach now, your programs,
visual approach,
they're the modern media. They're the modern means of communication.
Yeah. I mean, please God, in 20 years' time, people will hopefully be able to just look at one of these videos and say, that's what Brenda Springer looked like. That's what John Cullinane looked like. That's what he sounded like. And look at John's reaction to this. I remember John Cullinane like that. That's what I'm hoping by them.
The unfortunate thing about that is I have my doubts that they will, because the technology won't be
improve.
20 years' time. They were talking about the commission teachers list, and I was advocating for hard copies of that.
Yeah.
And my reason was this: they were saying, oh, the electronic versions one. I said, in 10 years' time, you won't have the technology to read that. Technology is changing.
That's true. Technology is changing so quickly.
And I said, on the other hand, in Egypt, they invented hieroglyphics, carving letters into stone, and 5,000
invented paper.
Were able to decipher those.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on that point, John, I know you're off somewhere today.
I'm off to Kerry. To Kerry, yeah.
Have a great time in Kerry, a great weekend. You deserve it. And we've actually gone an hour, over an hour and a half.
Oh, jeez.
The time has flown. John Cullinane, thank you very, very much.
God bless, Mary, and the best of luck with your project, and keep the roof over your head.
And we'll go on to your next book at the next interview.
Okie doke.
God bless.
Yes.
Bye-bye.